remember the giant boom that happened in terms of motocross and ATV games in the mid-2000s? A lot of people regard that era as probably the best in this genre. Almost like the era that Need for Speed Most Wanted 05 was to racing games. And even I personally have a bunch of great memories of playing this game, MX vs. ATV Unleashed, as honestly as a kid, and just like spending hours upon hours upon hours upon hours in this game. I don't even remember how many hours I spent on it at a time, but it was a lot. And one of the reasons why I did spend so much time on it was definitely because it was a fun and enjoyable game to just play and engage with. But I think it also served as a really good distraction for other things that were going on in both my life and also the world around me at that time. And I'm sure that a lot of others that played a lot of the games from this particular era can relate to that in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not in the exact same way, but these games, at least for me, always served as a nice distraction that I could always just get lost in and just do endless laps on whatever track I ended up choosing. Now, how do the new games hold up when we not necessarily put them side by side, but put them back to back with each other? Because obviously we're not going to be talking about graphics because there's no comparison. We're not going to be talking about graphics. We're not going to be talking about, frame rates and this, that, and the other. I mean, obviously gaming has progressed in a lot of ways over the years, and those two being a massive part of the progress. But in terms of fun factor and in terms of engagement, a lot of people have said that the series has gotten worse ever since Unleashed. And I've seen a lot of that in my comments on videos about whatever the newest MX vs. ATV game happens to be at the time. Now, I'm sure that a lot of that probably rests solely on the shoulders of nostalgia bias. So obviously, nostalgia bias is going to be a thing whenever we're talking about games from the mid-2000s because a lot of people seem to be extremely nostalgic for the games from that era. I mean, I even find myself sometimes being nostalgic for them too. I mean, if I didn't enjoy the games from that era, I don't think I would have taken the time or the trouble to go back and install Unleashed on my PC and do all of these laps on a keyboard because for some reason, a PC with an Xbox controller hooked up to it just doesn't really register with this game. So, whatever. It doesn't actually play all that bad on a keyboard, but I was a little bit annoyed by that. But of course, minor annoyances aside, it actually plays pretty well on the keyboard once you get kind of used to some of the motions. There are some aspects, of course, in terms of using the arrow keys that are clunky at best and uninspiring at worst, but I mean, they're not horrible. They don't absolutely destroy the experience, but they do kind of make it just a little awkward to play sometimes. Now, for the purposes of everything in this video, I'm obviously showing a lot of motocross bike gameplay, but I am well aware that Unleashed had so much more variety than ATVs and bikes because, I mean, Unleashed had planes, it had monster trucks, it had side-by-sides, and the list goes on and on and on and on. And I think a lot of that, massive level of variety, or rather vehicle variety, was probably one of the biggest factors that cemented Unleashed as a lot of people's favorite in the series, because if you got bored of racing bikes, for example, you could just grab a monster truck and go free roam around a map somewhere for as long as you wanted and just do it to your heart's content. And then you could just say, well, I'm done with that now. I'm good. I'm ready to go race bikes again. And because of that style, it just gave the players so much freedom to do just about whatever they wanted. Now, obviously, these games they're not necessarily taking up massive amounts of file space. They're not necessarily filling up your hard drive dramatically with, enormous install sizes. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to do a little comparison of how much disk space is required on PC between these two games. Y'all ready? MX vs. ATV Unleashed requires about a gig, whereas MX vs. ATV Legends requires about 33-ish gigs, I believe, which is about 33 times more space required on your hard drive that you have to dedicate to that game than Unleashed. Not that that's, I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other solely because of how much hard drive space it takes up. That'd be kind of a silly thing to judge a game on, but it is a wild thing to think about. And obviously it makes sense that the newer one would take up 33 times the space, because obviously technology has come a long way. We have vastly improved graphics. We have vastly more inputs that we're trying to take in from the player, and we're also trying to show the player more things. We're trying to engage with the player more. There's much higher quality in terms of visuals and sounds, and all of these different things obviously lead down to much higher file sizes, and so that's not really a surprise. But what is a surprise, or at least what was a surprise to me personally, was how much fun I had going back and playing Unleashed again. There was so much fun to be had, and I don't really know how to relay that other than the fact that it just ticked so many more boxes than I was expecting it to. Like, genuinely, I thought that going back into playing Unleashed again for this video, I thought, oh, well, it's probably just going to be a bunch of nostalgia, and then I'm going to get into it and I'm going to be like, well, was it actually that good? Yeah, it actually was that good. Not only was it that good, but it was so good that I ended up playing it for longer than I intended to, because I was having so much fun playing it that I had to go back and make sure that I hadn't run out of hard drive space because I forgot to turn my recording software off. It's legitimately that fun. And that is, of course, not in any way to say that the newer games are not fun, because they absolutely are. The newer games are honestly a really good time if you can look past some of the other issues that they have going on. And also, to be honest, the community around the MX versus ATV games has become extremely segmented now, because you had the crowd that was into the more kind of arcadey approach that games like Unleashed took, for example, and then you had others that wanted a more realistic and deeper experience and never fully got that from the MX versus ATV games, and so they moved over to games like MX Bikes. And that's no shade whatsoever to MX Bikes. It's an incredible game and it's an incredible simulator. I'm just not good at it. Like, there are few games, no matter how hard they actually are to play, that get me to that point of, like, you're almost wanting to legitimately, like, rip your hair out. That, MX Bikes, that gets me pretty close. Because you will just barely get into a rhythm, and the second you do, it's like, oh, you thought you knew what you were doing? And then the second it says that, it calls all of its buddies over and it says, did you hear what she said? She thinks she knows what she's doing. To which it basically proceeds to hit you on the head with a hammer and remind you that it's a simulator, a very hardcore one, and it's time for you to restart the race for the 13,557th time. But the purpose of this video is not to go on a rant about MX Bikes, because honestly, I could go on a rant about MX Bikes any day, because not because it's a bad game, it's an incredible game. It just frustrates the absolute crap out of me. So I have no problem ranting about it. And I'm sure someone in the comments is going to be like, well, you could just get good then and fix that problem. And I could. I don't want to, but I could. Now, I'm sure some of y'all will try to make the argument that the MX versus ATV series essentially, quote unquote, lost its way after MX versus ATV Unleashed. And on one hand, I can kind of see where that point of view might come from, because I think a lot of people, after the release of Unleashed and then in the subsequent games that followed, I think some people may have felt a little bit almost wronged by the series, because certain features that they had become accustomed to in Unleashed were no longer there, and they almost felt like those features were taken from them or stolen from them. And it's not the first time that a game series has sort of been accused of that in the eyes of its players. Like, oh, well, the following game in this series didn't have XYZ feature that the prior installment did, and therefore you took our features away. and in the cases of some series, only to drip feed those features back to the player later in the form of DLCs and updates and things like that. Which again, I can completely understand the frustration when it comes to content drip feeds. Content drip feeds are always frustrating to see, and unfortunately, in a lot of games, they have become the norm thanks to the sort of live service landscape that the gaming industry has found itself in today. Now, I'm not going to get into the topic of whether or not live service gaming is a bad thing, a good thing, an indifferent thing, whatever the case may be. That's a topic for another video, because we could go on for hours about that, and it's not really worth getting into that as a deeper topic in this video. But now that I've gone over all of the different points I wanted to cover in this video, I'm going to leave y'all with some raw gameplay from both of these games, and let me know if this let me know if this comparison makes you nostalgic for the older games in the series, or does it make you more excited for the future of the current games? I don't know. I'm going to leave it up to all of y'all in the comments down below to, of course, also leave me your feedback. But that's going to do it for this one, y'all, and I'll see y'all next time.